Okay, I have just finished reading, and for the first time, The Hero and the Crown by Robin McKinley. Even though this isn't a recent book, this is from the 80s, 84 I think it is. I've just found out that it existed last year. It's a prequel to another book, The Blue Sword, that I've been reading and rereading since I was in my teens. Before I go any further, I've got to say, look at that cover. It's not the world's best work. Look at that dragon. I'm sure you could have done better. The cover illustration is copyrighted to Dan Craig 2000, and the cover design is by Laurie Thorne. Guys, seriously, I'm sure you could do better than this. Plus, that dragon, I'm pretty sure, is meant to be Mao, who's the only full-size dragon in the whole book. And Mao is described as a black dragon. Colour challenged much. Anyway, neither here nor there, really. So, a couple of words about Robin McKinley. I've read a lot of Robin McKinley work. Her work is described as science fiction and fantasy. I've never read any science fiction by her. I suspect that science fiction is a tag that she gets because she was writing early on when science fiction and fantasy were all the same shelf. They're just extensions of the same thing. She does have some excellent fantasy, and I've read quite a bit of it. She has strong mythic themes in her fantasy. They're often quest-based, and this has both mythic themes and certainly a quest. In fact, this book is a myth in its own right, because this tells the story of Aaron Dragonslayer, who is referred to as an apocryphal hero far history figure in The Blue Sword, which was written first. I suspect that so many people who read The Blue Sword really, really wanted Aaron's story, probably including the author herself, that this got written as a response to that. Now, as well as fantasy, Robin McKinley writes a lot of other excellent stuff. I won't go into that too much. I'm sure I've reviewed other books of hers and will again. In this book, this book won an award, the Newbery Medal Award in 1985, which is an American award for the best children's fiction published that year, something like that. It's an American award anyway. McKinley herself, in 2022, was named the 39th Damon Knight Grand Master for her contributions to Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association named her the 39th Damon Knight Memorial Grand Master in recognition of her significant contributions to the literature of science fiction and fantasy. Well deserved, well deserved. McKinley is one of a small suite of authors, female authors, who in the 80s, thereabouts, we're going to say 80s, maybe 70s, started writing the fantasy that we all loved reading, only with female characters. Early fantasy and science fiction tended to not be great in female characters, and Robin McKinley grew up reading that stuff, and then she started writing the stories that she wanted to read only with a character that she felt she could associate with. I don't really bond with that viewpoint. I know many women of my age and younger who have it, but I never had a problem associating with characters who are male. It just wasn't an issue for me. Anyway, so this review of The Hero and the Crown is going to be very spoilery. It will spoiler the hell out of this book, but it's also pretty spoilery for The Blue Sword, because I can't really discuss this story without The Blue Sword, which I've been reading and rereading since my teens. So, and it's a hard one to review based on that. Okay, so when in the beginning of this novel, we've got Aaron, who is the only child of Arbeth. He's the king of Daymar. She is the only child of the king and his second wife. His second wife was controversial. It's unusual for the nobility. It was unusual for the nobility in Daymar at this stage to marry outside the nobility. And the king's first wife was part of the nobility but left no children. His second wife appears not nobility. She wasn't even truly traditional Daymar. She appeared one day as a commoner. She out of the north, and the north is very much the ancestral enemy of Daymar. It's got a lot of magic, which they call gifts. and in the Blue Sword gets called Keela, and you find out why through reading this book. But the Northerners are strange. They're often not entirely human. They ride horses that aren't entirely horses, and they are the hereditary enemies of Daymar. Daymar. When Aaron's mother appeared, she was pale and she had red hair, whereas Daymar is very much darker skinned colours and have black hair. Now, as this story starts, Aaron is in her early teens, we're going to say, and she's growing up in court. She's feeling very alienated because the stories of her mother having been a witch and magicked her father into falling in love and marry her followed her. She's got a few cousins who very significantly tease her, and she feels alienated. I seem to like books in which the main character starts off feeling very alienated from their society and then comes into their own sort of thing. And that is one of these. Now, in that first few pages, I felt disoriented. One of the things I love about the Blue Sword is the fact that your sword and sorcery story is not in any way European. That the heroine of that one is Harry, whose real name is Anharad, which she apparently doesn't like. She gets called Harry. And she is very much the European hero, though not a silly or giggly one. She's a very likable hero. And she goes off, has this adventure in Daymar, where Daymar is very much a desert community that has lashings of Asia or the Far East. People there are dark-skinned, dark-haired typically. They're very strong horse-based culture, tense, nomadic. They only have one city, and it's called the city because there's only one of them. I loved that feeling of a fantasy in a foreign land. There weren't that many when I came across that book. In the beginning of The Hero and the Crown, I think McKinley made significant efforts to make it feel, again, as a non-European, non-traditional style fantasy land, but it didn't work too well for me. Besides being told that all of Aaron's cousins had black hair and she doesn't, I wasn't getting a strong feeling of Asia or Far East. And that disoriented me to begin with, but within just a few pages, I was completely sucked into the story. All of part one, I never came up for air pretty much. I really loved it. I loved the reading experience as much as I loved the reading experience of the Blue Sword. So, Aaron, at one stage during that first part, comes across a book about the history of Daymar, and it talks about the old dragons that used to be in the land. These days, dragons in the land are all small. I imagine them kind of like the size and danger level of a large boar. They're dangerous, they kill children, they ruin property, but men will hunt them in groups of 2 or 3. Their main danger, of course, is that they breathe fire. This book that Aaron stumbles across not only talks about the enormous dragons of old, which the author believes will one day come back to Daymar to ravage the land again, but at the back there's a recipe for an ointment that you can put on that will shield you from flame. And for some years she slowly develops that remnant of a recipe into something that actually works. At the same time, isolated as she is from the court and not having any friends, she befriends her father's old war horse, Talat, who's had an injury and is lame in one leg. This is a fascinating part because as Aaron teaches herself to combat dragons and to ride Talat, she realizes that she's not going to be able to fight dragons all on her lonesome, of course, if she's got reins to worry about. So she teaches herself to ride without the reins. And then she cuts down the saddle and starts customizing it to fit her body and her legs, and she develops the method of riding that will later evolve into the common method in the Blue Sword. In the Blue Sword, any Daymar warrior sits his horse with no reins, no stirrups, and guides the horse by physical movements in the way that this book shows how that technique first developed by Aaron. Okay, so I actually really like Aaron's father. He's a more minor character in some ways, but he's very enjoyable. He's a sensible sort of man, and he's fond of his daughter. He may not always know what to do with her, but he's fond of her. There's no parents hating her type thing. She's got a cousin that hates her, but big deal. She's the daughter of the king, so she could break through that if she chose, and eventually she does. She gains confidence and security. Okay, come on. Through killing dragons, she becomes Aaron Dragonslayer, and then she starts to stand up for herself a little bit more. Now, part 2 starts on a whole new theme. The Hero and the Crown, which is the title. The Kings of Daymar had a crown. It was the hero's crown. It's been lost for a long time. And in the time with the crown being lost, there have started to be more incursions from the Northerners, more problems, more mischief. Mischief is what they call bad mojo magic coming across the border from the north. The crown used to protect Daymar from that. The crown's been lost for a long time. And in this part, Arbeth, I haven't mentioned Tor. Tor is the second, is the cousin, is Aaron's cousin, and he's closest to the throne, next in line for the throne sort of thing. He's had a bit of a crush on her for a long time. He was her best friend for many years. It's obvious they're going to end up with each other. It's obvious because we've read The Blue Sword, and we know that Aaron Kingslayer and Tor the Just were married. Not a lot of surprises there, though. I like the way she slowly develops the relationship. Okay, back to part 2. Arbeth and Tor and most of the military are about to ride off into the north to try and counter some recent mischief that's occurring. Just as Aaron petitions to ride with them, she's denied. Just as they're about to depart for this mission, the rider comes in from a village and says that the huge black dragon Mauer has indeed come back, just like her history told her it would. So she heads off to take care of the black dragon, but this is a full-size dragon, and though she does eventually kill it, it does her a huge amount of damage. She's burnt, she's sick. Dragons have a sort of malice magic, and she's infected by that. She barely survives. She crawls back to the city, where she lies in bed and getting sicker and sicker. Nothing really helps her, and it seems that she's dying. She keeps getting visions of this tall, pale man who's summoning her to come to him while he can still save her. We've read The Blue Sword. We know this is Luth, and she eventually goes there. Now, we know that Aaron was a student of Luth, even if we haven't read the back of the book, which I'm pretty sure mentions it, but The Blue Sword goes into it. He tells her, Luth meets Harry and tells her that Aaron was his favourite student, which is what gives Harry the hint that Luth has lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. He is, in fact, not really mortal at all. And the only way he finds to heal Aaron is by submerging her in a lake, and the result is that she's not entirely mortal anymore either. This comes in handy for her because after she's healed and learnt a little bit of magic, she heads off into the great beyond to take care of the evil magician Agsted. Agsded. Aged. Blah. Blah. Whatever. If you read it, you don't have to pronounce it. I suppose that's something. Agamemnon or whatever, and Luth both studied as magicians under the same master. Luth can give her some advice, but not a lot. She figures out that he is actually her uncle, her mother having been his sister who escaped him and in the process ended up coming to Daymar and marrying her husband and producing Aaron. And there's a prophecy, of course, that sends her back to take care of him. Now, obviously, she survives all this. There's a couple of interesting points about that. The blue sword which she receives from Luth and which later comes to Harry in the book, The Blue Sword, is very much a sort of... Is it a MacGuffin? I can never remember what a MacGuffin is. It's a Deus Ex Machina. Basically, the fact that she can't actually use a sword very well doesn't matter because the blue sword can do it. Her arm gets tired, but basically the sword is waving her around, not her waving the sword around. The sword defeats the sorcerer more than she does. The sword manages to clear the enemies from the gates of the city when she makes it back. It's less her, more the sword. And in the process of killing off this evil sorcerer that's been making mischief for Daemar, she finds out that he actually owns the hero's crown. She gets the hero's crown, she brings it back to the city, hands it over to Tor, who's the next king, during a massive battle, and eventually saves her people, marries Tor, etc., etc., happily ever after. So while I loved the first part of this book and I enjoyed most of the reading experience of the second part, I did find it patchy. There were a few things that didn't flow as well. Her time with Luth seemed to me to be written... It didn't seem to flow the same way. It didn't seem its own story. It felt to me as if McKinley was writing that in order to answer the questions or fit in with the things from The Blue Sword. Now, at the beginning of this story, it clearly says that this happened so far before the Blue Sword that this kingdom of Daemar isn't even in the same configuration as it is by then. I don't think you had to make such a huge effort to meet every single thing the Blue Sword has to say. I'm not sure it contributed. There's a relationship between Luth and Aerin which at times is quite touching and nice, but at times feels very contrived. I guess that's the word that I've got to say about a lot of the later part. It felt contrived. The big battle at the end didn't satisfy as much as it could, at least not Aerin's battle with the sorcerer Asgard, whatever. It wasn't a really satisfying fight. It was over quite fast. I know that she had to hurry back to participate in the final war. The final war was actually quite satisfying. But I didn't know about that I really loved that part. I don't know if that's me or if the book just felt a bit patchy. Not sure about that. On her way to face the sorcerer, we get this thing where all these large cats join her for no reason, and all these wild dogs join her for no reason, and these cats and dogs are obviously the great ancestors of the hunting cats and dogs that Harry gets to meet when she goes to Daemar in the Blue Sword. Don't know that you had to do that either. I'm not sure that we really need a backstory for giant cats and hunting dogs being part of a Eastern society, but Robin McKinley is known for enjoying animals and adding them into stories. I certainly do think she did a great job with the horses. Love the horses bit. So did I love it? Yes. Would I give it a 5-star? Absolutely. This is absolutely a 5-star. Did I love it as much as The Blue Sword? No, I didn't. I personally never even knew to look for it because I didn't feel that the story of Aerin necessarily needed to be told more than it was told in The Blue Sword. I get lots of other people would have. A lot of people are completionist about these sort of things. They hear the story of Aerin being told and it's like they want it all told, so here it all is. Good book. Definitely not McKinley's best. Does it enhance The Blue Sword? Well, for me, not really. For me, that was a brilliant book and didn't need enhancing. Is it worthy in its own right? Yes, it's not bad. Not my favourite McKinley ever, but still, pretty good book. It does feel a lot younger than The Blue Sword. The Blue Sword to me never felt like a young adult book. It just felt like a fantasy book. This one, however, is very definitely very definitely a younger audience. Not just because Erin herself is younger when it starts. I think she's about 14 or 15 when the book starts. Harry was a teenager, I suppose, but she was a teenager in a society that's very much a English Raj India style era, in which case marrying girls at 17 or 18 was not unusual, so Harry was, for all intents and purposes, an adult. This one felt younger, but I do still like young adult. I did enjoy it. Right, I'll stop now.